Imagine discovering that the very people you trust to run your business are secretly stealing from you. But instead of confronting them outright, you disguise yourself as a new employee to uncover the truth. What happens next will leave you speechless, because when the mastermind is revealed, the owner's response is something no one could have predicted. Stay tuned to see how one bold move turns betrayal into a shocking act of redemption. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. Ethan Grayson stood in his office, a modest, windowless room tucked away at the back of his store. The hum of activity filtered through the walls, cash registers beeping, employees chatting, and the occasional creak of carts rolling over the tiled floor. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but the papers spread across his desk told a different story. Missing inventory, unexplained discrepancies, and dwindling profits. Something was wrong. His gaze shifted to the security footage on his monitor. Rows of shelves filled with neatly arranged goods flickered on the screen, but nothing appeared unusual. Yet he knew the theft wasn't a fluke. It was deliberate. Someone on his staff was betraying him. The thought made his stomach twist. This store wasn't just a business. It was the result of years of hard work, late nights, and sacrifices. He sighed and turned to Natalie, his no-nonsense accountant. "These numbers, it's not adding up." Natalie adjusted her glasses, her tone sharp but concerned. "It's not a mistake, Ethan. The pattern is too calculated. Someone is skimming from you." Ethan looked through the office window into the store. Karen, his store manager, was at the front counter, flipping through a clipboard. Maggie, the shy cashier, smiled nervously at a customer while fumbling with change. Jake, the stockroom worker, leaned casually against a cart, chatting with another employee. Each face looked familiar, trustworthy. But could he be sure? The weight of doubt settled on his chest. He turned back to Natalie. "If someone's stealing, I need to catch them, but not as the boss. If I come in as myself, they'll just cover their tracks." Natalie frowned. "What are you planning?" "I'll go undercover," he said firmly. "As a new employee, no one will see it coming." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Whoever's doing this is going to slip up, and when they do, I'll be watching." Ethan's new persona, Tom Anderson, blended seamlessly into the background of the store. No one paid much attention to the quiet, slightly awkward, new guy. Karen handed him a badge and showed him the ropes, her tone friendly but brisk. She walked him through the aisles, rattling off procedures, though her eyes occasionally darted toward her tablet as if she were distracted. Ethan took mental notes, paying close attention to the way she spoke, calm and professional, but there was a tightness in her jaw that hinted at tension. "Breaks are 15 minutes, no more," Karen said as they stopped near the stockroom. "You'll mostly be helping Jake back here, restocking shelves and unloading shipments. If you have any questions, come to me or Sophia." Ethan nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Got it." Jake appeared moments later, his movements loose and self-assured. He looked Ethan up and down, with a grin that was just shy of mocking. "So you're the new guy? Hope you're ready to sweat. This job isn't for slackers." Ethan forced a chuckle. "I'll keep up." Jake laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "We'll see." The stockroom was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of cardboard and cleaning supplies. Rows of shelves stretched from wall to wall, filled with boxes labeled in bold, black text. Jake led the way, tossing casual remarks over his shoulder about the workload. As they unloaded a shipment, Ethan noticed how Jake's eyes lingered on certain boxes, those containing the most expensive items, before quickly moving on. It was subtle, but Ethan's instincts sharpened. Over the next few days, Ethan observed everything. Jake's confidence bordered on arrogance, and he had a knack for charming the other employees, cracking jokes and smoothing over minor conflicts. Maggie, on the other hand, was jittery and soft-spoken, often fumbling when Jake was nearby. During one shift, Ethan noticed her hands trembling as she scanned items at the register. "You okay?" he asked quietly as he helped her bag groceries. She glanced up, startled. "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." Her answer was unconvincing, and Ethan filed it away. Maggie wasn't just tired, she was scared of something. Karen, meanwhile, seemed efficient on the surface, but Ethan couldn't ignore how she avoided eye contact whenever he mentioned inventory or asked about store policies. She stayed behind her desk more often than necessary, her office door always closed. If she was hiding something, she was careful about it. One evening, as the store quieted down, Ethan decided to explore the stockroom again. He pretended to be reorganizing boxes while keeping an eye on the door. As he moved a crate, something caught his attention, a small scuff mark near the base of the shelving unit. It wasn't in line with the rest of the pristine floor. Kneeling down, he pressed his hand against the back wall and felt a faint gap between the wooden panels. His pulse quickened. He pushed harder, and a hidden compartment creaked open. Inside was a small stash of items, high-value electronics that had been marked as missing. The sight sent a rush of anger and validation through him. He was right. Someone was stealing from him, and they were bold enough to stash the goods right on the premises. Before he could investigate further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the stockroom. Someone was coming. Ethan froze, heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, and he quickly slid the panel shut, stepping away from the shelf just as Jake rounded the corner. Jake stopped, his expression curious, but guarded. "What are you doing back here?" Ethan forced a smile, gesturing to the stack of boxes beside him. "Just reorganizing. Figured I'd make myself useful." Jake's gaze lingered on him for a moment, his grin returning. "You're eager. Don't overwork yourself, man. No one here expects you to be a hero." With a casual shrug, Jake turned and walked away, but something in his tone unsettled Ethan. The way Jake said "hero" carried a weight that felt almost like a warning. Ethan watched him disappear into the hallway, his suspicions solidifying. Jake wasn't just cocky, he was hiding something. And now Ethan was certain he was on the right trail. But as he stood there in the quiet stockroom, a gnawing thought crept into his mind. Was Jake working alone? Or was there more to this than he had imagined? The following morning, Ethan arrived early, blending into the routine of the store before most employees showed up. His mind replayed the events of the previous evening, focusing on Jake's reaction. There had been no outright suspicion in his demeanor, but his casual words felt like a veiled challenge. Ethan's instincts screamed that Jake wasn't just involved, he was central to the operation. But there were still too many unknowns. How long had this been going on? And more importantly, was Jake acting alone? As the day unfolded, Ethan subtly observed the rest of the staff. Maggie continued to exude nervous energy, avoiding prolonged conversations with anyone, especially Jake. During a quiet moment at the register, Ethan leaned over and handed her a folded receipt, pretending it was a piece of inventory paperwork. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Just something I noticed," Ethan said, his tone casual. The note inside read, "Are you okay? If you need to talk, I'm here." He hoped she'd respond later, away from prying eyes. Maggie hesitated before shoving the note into her pocket, glancing around as if worried someone might notice. Ethan caught the way her hands shook slightly as she returned to her work. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself unloading a shipment in the stockroom with Jake. The air between them was tense, though Jake masked it with his usual banter. "So, how are you finding the job, new guy?" Jake asked, tossing a box onto the shelf with a little too much force. "Not too boring, I hope." Ethan shrugged. "It's fine. Keeps me busy." Jake smirked. "Busy's good. Makes the day go faster. Just don't go sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, you know? This place runs smoother when everyone stays in their lane." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ethan responded with an easy laugh, masking his irritation. I hear you. As Jake turned back to the stack of boxes, Ethan noticed something fall from his pocket, a small piece of folded paper. Jake didn't seem to realize it had slipped out, too engrossed in his task. Ethan's heart raced as he casually bent down, pretending to adjust his shoe, and pocketed the paper. He'd look at it later, away from any chance of being caught. That evening, Ethan sat in his apartment, staring at the piece of paper. When he unfolded it, he found a hastily scribbled list of items: electronics, small appliances, and other high-value goods. Next to each item was a set of initials, *M and *K. Ethan's stomach sank. He knew the initials, Maggie and Karen. The revelation hit him like a punch. If the note was genuine, it meant Maggie, the timid cashier, and Karen, his trusted manager, were both tied to the theft. But was this proof or a setup? Jake could have planted the note to misdirect suspicion. The more Ethan thought about it, the more tangled the situation became. If Karen was involved, she would have had access to inventory systems and schedules, tools that made the operation possible. Maggie's role, however, was less clear. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see Maggie standing there, her face pale, and her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I got your note. I think we need to talk." Ethan stepped aside, letting her in. The door clicked shut behind her, and she wrung her hands, struggling to find her words. I don't know who you are, but you're not just some new guy, are you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her, noting the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just scared, she was desperate. Finally, he spoke. "You're right. I'm not who you think I am. But I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand what's going on." Maggie's shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "It's not what you think. I didn't want to be part of this. Jake, he made me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd tell Karen I've been taking extra cash from the register to cover my rent. I swear, I only did it once, but he caught me, and now he's using it against me." Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "And Karen? Is she part of this?" Maggie hesitated, her hands twisting together. "I don't know. I think Jake has something on her too. She's been acting weird for months, always checking the cameras, always looking over her shoulder, but she's never said anything to me." Ethan exhaled, piecing together the fragments. Jake wasn't just bold, he was manipulative. He had leverage over Maggie and potentially Karen, using their weaknesses to his advantage. The operation was more intricate than Ethan had imagined. "What does he want you to do?" Ethan asked. Maggie's voice trembled. "Sometimes he tells me to ring up items without scanning them. Other times he makes me leave the stockroom unlocked so he can stash things. I didn't want to, but I didn't know what else to do." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. Maggie wasn't innocent, but she was clearly trapped. The question now was how to untangle the web without tipping off Jake, or whoever else might be involved. As Maggie left, Ethan sat back, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He wasn't just dealing with theft, he was dealing with fear, manipulation, and secrets that ran deeper than he'd anticipated. And as the pieces fell into place, one thought lingered in his mind. Jake might not be the only mastermind behind this operation. The next day, Ethan returned to the store with renewed focus. Maggie's late-night confession had given him insight into the tangled web Jake had spun, but it also raised more questions. If Jake was manipulating Maggie, and possibly Karen, what else was he capable of? And if Karen was complicit, how far had her involvement gone? Ethan's task wasn't just to expose the theft anymore, it was to dismantle the entire operation without causing irreparable damage to the store or its people. As the morning unfolded, Ethan noticed Karen was unusually tense. Her usual brisk efficiency was replaced by distracted movements, and she seemed more curt than usual with the staff. At one point, she emerged from her office holding a stack of papers, her knuckles white as she clutched them. Ethan filed her behavior away as another piece of the puzzle. Jake, on the other hand, was his usual confident self. He strutted through the stockroom like he owned it, cracking jokes with the other employees and occasionally throwing pointed glances in Ethan's direction. It was clear Jake suspected something, though he wasn't ready to act on it yet. Later that afternoon, Ethan caught a quiet moment with Sophia, the shift supervisor. She was busy straightening shelves in the electronics section, her movements methodical and precise. Ethan had noticed that Sophia, unlike the others, seemed genuinely invested in the store's success. If anyone could offer insight, it was her. "Hey, Sophia," he said casually, stepping up beside her. "Got a minute?" She looked up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Sure? What's up?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've been trying to get a handle on how things run around here, and, well, it seems like there's a lot of tension lately. Is everything okay?" Sophia frowned, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Ethan said with a shrug. "Just seems like people are on edge. Karen's been snapping at everyone, and Jake, well, he's Jake." Sophia snorted softly. "Jake's always been like that. He knows how to push people's buttons. As for Karen, I think she's stressed. She's been acting weird for a while now, keeps locking herself in the office, always checking the cameras. I think she's worried about something, but she won't talk about it." Ethan leaned against the shelf, pretending to examine a nearby product. "Do you think it's about the inventory issues? I heard there've been some problems with missing items." Sophia's expression darkened. "Probably. Karen's been working here forever, and she's always been on top of things. But lately, it's like she's hiding something. Honestly, I feel bad for her. She's not the type to let things get out of control." Ethan nodded, filing away the information. Sophia's perspective confirmed what he'd already suspected. Karen wasn't operating out of greed or malice. Something or someone was forcing her hand. As the day wore on, Ethan continued to observe, piecing together the dynamics at play. Maggie avoided Jake as much as possible, her nervous glances betraying her fear. Karen stayed holed up in her office, emerging only to give curt instructions to the staff. Jake, meanwhile, seemed to revel in the tension, his cocky demeanor growing bolder with each passing hour. That evening, Ethan decided to take a risk. After the store closed, he lingered in the stockroom under the pretense of finishing up some tasks. Once the other employees had left, he slipped into Karen's office, careful to avoid the cameras. The room was neat and orderly, but there was a sense of unease in the air, as if the walls themselves held secrets. Ethan's eyes fell on the desk, where a stack of papers sat neatly arranged. He flipped through them, his heart pounding as he scanned the contents. They were inventory reports marked with annotations in Karen's handwriting. Certain items were circled in red, high-value goods that had been reported missing. Next to them, Karen had written dates and times, many of which matched the shifts Jake had worked. The evidence was damning, but it also revealed something crucial. Karen wasn't the thief. She was tracking the thefts, trying to piece together what was happening. But if she knew Jake was behind it, why hadn't she confronted him? What was stopping her? Ethan didn't have time to dwell on the question. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the office, growing louder by the second. He froze, his pulse racing. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and for a moment there was silence. Then the handle turned, and the door creaked open. Karen stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Tom," she said, her voice sharp, "what are you doing in here?" Ethan straightened, keeping his expression calm. "I was just, I needed to check something in the inventory reports. I didn't mean to intrude." Karen's gaze hardened. "The reports aren't your concern. You're a stockroom worker, not a manager. Stay out of my office." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Ethan felt the tension in the air shift as she crossed her arms, her tone lowering. "You're not who you say you are you?" Ethan hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, he decided to take a calculated risk. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not just a stockroom worker. I'm here to figure out what's happening in this store." Karen's eyes widened, and for a moment her mask of composure slipped. She looked away, her shoulders sagging. "I knew something was off about you," she muttered. Then, after a long pause, she added, "If you know what's going on, you need to be careful. Jake isn't someone you want to cross." The words hung in the air, heavy with warning. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Karen might not be an ally yet, but her fear confirmed what he already knew. Jake was dangerous, and if Ethan was going to stop him, he'd need to move carefully and quickly. Ethan left the office that night with Karen's warning ringing in his ears. Jake wasn't just bold. He was dangerous. Karen's fear confirmed that Jake wasn't merely an opportunistic thief. He was controlling people, exploiting their vulnerabilities, and running the operation with a confidence that suggested he believed he couldn't be stopped. Ethan knew the longer this continued, the harder it would be to contain the damage. The following morning, Ethan's plan took a more deliberate turn. He needed more than observations and suspicions. He needed undeniable proof. If he was going to confront Jake and protect the others caught in his web, he had to catch him in the act. For now, though, he kept up the act, blending into the routine as Tom. As Ethan worked alongside Jake in the stockroom later that day, he noticed the easy way Jake carried himself. It was as if he believed he was untouchable. Jake even cracked a joke about how quiet Ethan was. "You're too serious, man," Jake said with a smirk, tossing a box onto the shelf. "Loosen up. This job doesn't need a hero." Ethan smiled faintly, but said nothing. Jake's words felt like a challenge, an intentional reminder of who held the upper hand, or who thought they did. Later that evening, Ethan stationed himself near the stockroom, watching as the store began to wind down. The aisles grew quieter, and employees left in small groups, their laughter and chatter fading into the night. Jake, however, lingered. Ethan noticed him slipping toward the back, his movements precise and deliberate. Ethan followed from a distance, careful not to draw attention. He rounded the corner just in time to see Jake entering the stockroom. Jake hadn't noticed him, or so Ethan thought. The door creaked slightly as it closed behind Jake, and Ethan hesitated, debating his next move. Suddenly, the door opened again, and Jake stepped out, his expression sharp and suspicious. He looked directly at Ethan. "Something I can help you with, new guy?" Ethan forced a casual tone. "Just finishing up some things. Thought you were already out for the night." Jake leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Nah, still had a few things to wrap up. You know how it is." The tension was palpable. Jake's grin was tight, his eyes scanning Ethan as if trying to figure out how much he knew. Ethan shrugged, playing it cool. "All right, see you tomorrow then." He turned and walked away, his pulse racing. Jake was on edge, and Ethan knew he had to act soon before Jake became more careful, or escalated. As he left the store, an idea began to form. If Jake was truly at the center of the operation, Ethan needed to force his hand. The next morning, Ethan arrived earlier than usual, meeting Natalie in his office. She was the only person who knew the full extent of what he was doing. "I need you to help me stage something," he said, laying out the plan. Natalie frowned, her skepticism evident. "This could backfire, Ethan." "I know," he admitted, "but it's the only way to get the proof we need. If we don't act now, this will spiral even further." That night, Ethan set his trap. A high-value shipment of electronics was scheduled to arrive, goods Jake would almost certainly target. Natalie adjusted the inventory system to make it look as though some of the items hadn't been scanned in yet, creating an opportunity for Jake to strike. As the shipment arrived, Ethan positioned himself strategically, pretending to sort boxes in a corner of the stockroom while keeping an eye on the newly delivered goods. He spotted Jake watching the delivery from the other side of the room, his expression calculating. Jake's usual swagger seemed even more pronounced, as if he already had a plan in place. Hours passed, the store quieted, and Ethan waited. When the clock struck closing time, most of the staff left for the night. Only Ethan, Jake, and Karen remained. Karen was in her office, her door shut, while Jake loitered near the stockroom, his movements unusually deliberate. Ethan pretended to leave, walking out through the main entrance and circling back around to re-enter through the rear exit. He moved silently, positioning himself behind a stack of crates where he had a clear view of the shipment. He didn't have to wait long. Jake appeared, his steps quiet but purposeful. He glanced over his shoulder, then moved to the shipment, carefully opening one of the boxes. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched Jake begin transferring items into a duffel bag he had stashed nearby. Jake worked quickly, his movements precise, as though he had done this dozens of times before. Ethan stepped out of the shadows, his voice cutting through the silence. "Looking for something?" Jake froze, the duffel bag in his hand. Slowly he turned, his expression hardening when he saw Ethan. "You just couldn't mind your own business, could you?" Jake said, his tone laced with venom. Ethan held his ground, his voice steady. "I don't think this is your business to be minding either, Jake. How long have you been doing this? How many people have you dragged into it?" Jake's grin returned, but it was cold, dangerous. "You have no idea what you're talking about, new guy, and you're way out of your league." "I know enough," Ethan said. "I know you've been stealing from this store for months. I know you've been blackmailing Maggie, and maybe Karen too. This ends tonight." Jake's jaw tightened, his mask of confidence slipping for the first time. "You think you're going to stop me? You don't even know who you're dealing with." The words carried a chilling weight, but Ethan didn't flinch. "No, Jake, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I'm done letting you control this place." Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Karen appeared in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "It's over." Jake looked between Ethan and Karen, his eyes narrowing as he realized he'd been cornered, but instead of panicking, he smirked. "You think this changes anything?" he said. "I'm not the only one who's been benefiting from this mess." Karen's expression darkened, but she said nothing. Ethan's heart sank as he realized Jake wasn't bluffing. There were more layers to this scheme than he'd uncovered, and the night was far from over. Jake's smirk lingered as he stepped forward, the duffel bag still in his grip. Karen stayed frozen in the doorway, her face a mix of fear and guilt. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together Jake's words. "I'm not the only one who's been benefiting from this mess." Was Jake bluffing, or was there someone else pulling strings behind the scenes? "So, what's the plan, hero?" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You gonna call the cops? Turn me in? Go ahead. Let's see how far you get before the whole thing blows up in your face." Ethan's voice remained calm, though his pulse thundered in his ears. "It's over, Jake. You've been caught. Whatever leverage you think you have, it's not going to save you." Jake laughed, a low, bitter sound. "Leverage? Oh, you have no idea how deep this goes. You think Karen here is innocent?" He shot a glance at her, his grin widening as she flinched. "She's known about this for months. Haven't you, Karen?" Karen's face turned white, and she shook her head weakly. "I didn't," she stammered. "I didn't have a choice." "See," Jake continued, his tone triumphant. "Everyone's got something to lose. Karen's been covering for me. Maggie's been helping me. And you're standing here acting like you can clean all this up with some heroic speech. You can't. You're in way over your head, pal." Ethan turned to Karen, his eyes searching hers. "Is that true? You've been covering for him?" Tears welled in Karen's eyes as she nodded slowly, her voice breaking. I didn't want to, but he found out about my son." She paused, swallowing hard. "My son got in trouble last year. He He stole some electronics, and Jake found out. He said if I didn't help him, he'd go to the police. I couldn't let my son go to jail." Ethan exhaled sharply, the weight of her confession hitting him like a blow. Jake had been exploiting Karen's fear, just as he had done with Maggie. The entire operation was built on manipulation, and everyone involved was trapped in their own way. "You don't have to do this anymore," Ethan said to Karen, his tone firm but compassionate. "You're not the only one Jake has been using. It's time to stop being afraid of him." Karen hesitated, her hands trembling. "You don't understand. If he tells the police—" "I'll handle it," Ethan interrupted. "I'll protect you and your son, but you have to help me put an end to this." Jake snorted, his confidence wavering. "You think she's going to help you? You think anyone will take your word over mine? You're nothing but a temp." Ethan's expression hardened. "I'm not just a temp," he said, his voice steady. "I'm the owner of this store." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Karen's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening slightly as the realization sank in. Jake's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He took a step back, clutching the duffel bag tighter. "Ethan Grayson," Ethan continued, stepping closer to Jake, "and I've been watching you for weeks. I've seen how you operate, how you use people, threaten them, manipulate them to cover your tracks. But it ends tonight." Jake's bravado cracked, his eyes darting toward the door, as if calculating his chances of escape. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he spat. "You think you've got it all figured out, but you're just one guy. You don't have proof. You don't have—" "I have everything I need," Ethan cut in. "The cameras are rolling. I've been recording everything since you walked into this room." Jake froze, the color draining from his face. Ethan had set up hidden cameras earlier that day, anticipating this exact moment. Every word, every action, was now evidence that could be used to bring Jake down. "You're done, Jake," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You can either cooperate and take responsibility for what you've done, or I'll make sure the police see this footage and everything I've uncovered about your operation." The room fell silent. Karen stared at Jake, her expression a mixture of anger and relief. Jake's confidence was gone, replaced by a panicked, cornered look. Finally, he dropped the duffel bag with a loud thud and raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine," he muttered. "You win. Congratulations, boss." But Ethan wasn't finished. He turned to Karen. "This doesn't have to define you. If you're willing to come clean and cooperate, I'll make sure you're not held responsible for what Jake forced you to do." Karen nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted any of this." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll fix it. Together." As Karen stepped out of the stockroom, Jake glared at Ethan, his defiance returning in a last-ditch effort. "This isn't over," he said. "You think you've won, but people like me don't stay down for long." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "People like you only have power when others are afraid, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." Jake said nothing, his jaw tightening, as Ethan grabbed the duffel bag and headed for the door. The weight of the night hung heavily in the air, but for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of clarity. He had taken the first step toward reclaiming his store and his trust in the people around him. But he knew this wasn't the end. There were still wounds to heal, both for himself and for those Jake had hurt. And as he walked into the night, he silently vowed to make things right, no matter how long it took. The store felt different the next morning. The air was heavy with an unspoken tension, the kind that lingered after a storm had passed, but left its mark. Ethan stood near the registers, watching his employees move about. Maggie offered a faint, nervous smile when she saw him, while Karen avoided eye contact, keeping her focus on the clipboard in her hands. The weight of what had transpired hung over all of them. Jake was gone. After last night's confrontation, Ethan had called the police. The footage from the hidden cameras, combined with Karen's confession, had been enough to have Jake taken into custody. Maggie, though complicit in the scheme, had been spared any legal consequences after Ethan vouched for her and explained how Jake had coerced her. Karen, too, had been given a second chance under the condition that she cooperate fully in unraveling the mess Jake had created. Ethan walked to the break room, where Karen sat at the table, staring at her cup of coffee. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mixture of guilt and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "I don't deserve another chance after everything I've done." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Everyone makes mistakes, Karen. What matters is what you do moving forward. This store isn't just about business. It's about the people who make it what it is. You've been part of that for years. I'm not going to let one bad decision erase all the good you've done." Karen nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'll make it right, Ethan. I swear, I know you will," he said with a small smile. "But it's not just about fixing the damage. It's about rebuilding trust. That's going to take time. For you, for Maggie, and for the rest of the staff." Karen looked down at her coffee, her voice trembling. "What about Jake? Do you think he'll try to come back? To retaliate?" Ethan's expression hardened. "If he does, I'll be ready. He doesn't scare me anymore." As the day went on, Ethan called a meeting with the entire staff. They gathered in the stockroom, their expressions ranging from curiosity to unease. Maggie stood near the back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, while Sophia stood at the front, her brow furrowed in concern. Ethan stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I want to thank all of you for your hard work over the past few weeks. I know things have been tense, and some of you might have questions about what's been happening." He paused, scanning their faces. "The truth is, there were some serious problems in this store, problems that threatened not just the business, but the trust we have in each other. Those problems have been dealt with. But moving forward, I want to make one thing clear. This is a fresh start." Maggie shifted nervously, her eyes darting to the floor. Ethan caught the movement and addressed her directly. "Maggie, I know this has been especially hard for you, but you've shown courage by coming forward, and I want you to know I believe in you. You're part of this team, and I'm here to support you." Maggie's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," Ethan continued, his tone firm but encouraging. "To all of you, if you ever feel like something isn't right, if you're struggling, or if you're unsure about something, come to me. My door is always open. We're a team, and we're only as strong as the trust we have in each other." Sophia stepped forward, a determined look on her face. "We'll get through this together." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement, and Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. The cracks Jake had caused would take time to heal, but the first step had been taken. For the first time in months, the store felt like it was moving towards something better. That evening, as Ethan locked up the store, he stood for a moment in the quiet, dimly lit space. The shelves stood tall and orderly, the faint hum of the air conditioning the only sound. He had nearly lost everything, not just the store, but the connection to the people who made it special. Now he was determined to ensure that never happened again. Ethan stepped outside, the cool night air washing over him. He looked up at the store's sign, its bold letters illuminated against the dark sky. This place was more than a business. It was a reflection of resilience, of second chances, and of the strength that came from standing together. With a deep breath, Ethan turned and walked toward his car, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm was over, but the journey was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. Ethan's journey was more than just uncovering theft. It was a lesson in humanity, trust, and resilience. The store, once on the brink of crumbling under betrayal, became a symbol of redemption and second chances. Ethan realized that leadership wasn't just about running a business. It was about understanding the people who made it thrive. By extending forgiveness to Karen and Maggie, he showed that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, no matter how deep their mistakes. And in confronting Jake, Ethan proved that fear and manipulation only hold power when they are allowed to go unchecked. In the weeks that followed, the store flourished. Employees worked together with renewed dedication, strengthened by the trust Ethan had rebuilt. Karen and Maggie, once burdened by guilt, became stronger, more committed members of the team. The lesson was clear. Honesty, compassion, and courage have the power to mend even the deepest wounds. This story reminds us that challenges are opportunities to grow, and the bonds we form through hardship can make us stronger than ever. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more lessons in resilience, leadership, and human connection. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Ethan's shoes? Let's discuss.